So, Bob, emails directed at you.
Oof.
Emails in your face. Annual patron Hannah from London. She says, "Hi, Dr. Kirk and Bob.
Woof.
I have had the same therapist for 10 years, attending periodically for 6 months at a time, usually." Okay, so like 6 months of therapy and then take a break off and on, and for 10 years. Recently, I got in touch with my therapist on an off period, and she told me that she is taking a year off due to burnout. And though she can't say for certain, she is likely to retire soon. I wonder, well, first off, Bob, any thoughts on that?
That sucks, burnout. I don't know if I would have said that to my client. I'm taking a year off for burnout. I might say I'm taking a year off, but I'm not sure what the benefit to the client is.
What would be the risk?
They're going to think, all right, is it because of me?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no reason to mention that. It's totally viable to, and I think a lot of clients, even if they're not happy about it, would accept an announcement of, I'm taking a year off due to personal reasons, and or I'm just taking a sabbatical for a year because I want to write my book or whatever. Just something that has less risk of giving a complex to your client you're communicating with, and maybe all your clients, because if this is tweeted and all your other clients find out, then there's that. And also the concern that clients would have of, is my therapist present? Right?
Yeah.
Going on. I wondered what you and Bob have to say about processing the end of therapeutic relationships in good circumstances, as often the focus can be on terminations for bad reasons. And I was able to find much literature on saying goodbye between therapists and clients when the relationship is good. My therapist sent me a beautiful email. Well, first off, Bob, what do you think about, so looking at it from that angle, which is what she's getting at, which is that, never mind the burnout, there's a possibility that my therapist, who I really like, I've been working with on and off for 10 years, I might be terminating with her, even though that wasn't my choice. But I have a lot of good memories with her, and it's not because of an ethical concern or I'm firing her because something bad happens. So what's that like? What's the grief? How do you process that? What do you do with it? What would you say?
If you want to meet with your therapist to talk it over and they're open to it, then why not? Maybe you want to take a victory lap. These are the things that we did together that I found really helpful, or I really appreciate you, or maybe you want to hear from your therapist their appreciation of you or whatever. Yeah, fine, right? You do you.
Yeah, I get chills because I think of this termination and this sort of goodbye as one of the most beautiful human experiences we can have. And it's really quite unique because in other relationships, you wouldn't do that, right? If it was a friend and you were, the only thing akin to it is if your friend had a terminal illness. Recently this happened to me with Paul David having killed himself because of his progressing Alzheimer's. And I had a year to say goodbye to him. And it felt good to be able to have that, because other times, another friend I'm thinking way back when I was in my 20s, he was a coworker of mine that I bonded with. He was actually the domestic violence specialist in my agency, and we would talk a lot. And one day he didn't show up to work, and next day he didn't show up to work. And then I heard from him or from his wife or someone, that he had a really serious cardiovascular, or I can't remember what it was, some heart thing. And he was young, or some lung thing. I remember thinking it might have been because he smoked a shit ton of weed. But anyway, who knows? But he went into the hospital and was, so I'm like, oh, well, he'll be back at work. A couple of weeks go by, and I'm still haven't seen him or heard from him. And I think through the grapevine, I heard that it was serious. And so I called him in the hospital, And I think his wife picked up from my memory, and I'm like, oh, I'm just calling for so-and-so. And she's like, oh, and there's kind of frantic, and, he gets the phone, and I'm like, hey, how's it going? And he was really brief because he was in the middle of something or stressed, or I don't know, right? You could imagine. He didn't have time or the energy to deal with me. And overall, I just remember him essentially saying like, he seemed distracted, and he said, I gotta go. And that was the last I talked to him, and then he died.
He died.
This is 30 years ago, and it's still in my head, that feeling of, that was my last conversation with him, was that really brief. And, I get it. I can't imagine what was happening in the moment for him, but it was, I don't know, it was hard for me in that grief. It all happened so fast. And he wasn't, he was young. He seemed old to me at the time, but I was 27, so I'm guessing he was 45-ish, maybe 50. I don't know. Yeah. So with a therapist, especially, 10 years therapist, you can, and depending on the style of therapy, but it sounds like it was in the Bob style of love and connection and deepness, that to say goodbye to your therapist, to have that opportunity, it can be so beautiful. Your therapist can know you better than anybody in a lot of ways. And the therapeutic relationship can be so pure, right? Because the love and the goodness and the nurturing and the purpose and the meaning can have such a concentrated thing to it, right? So that's what I think about that kind of goodbye. And I think about a lot of the greats, the Irvin Yalom's and others who talk about these kinds of goodbyes and just how profound they are. And sometimes it can go the other direction, where a client has a terminal illness and you get a chance to say goodbye to them. It can. And I've had some of those goodbyes, not in that way, but long-term clients that I will, a client will graduate from therapy, or a couple will graduate from therapy, or a couple will decide to break up. But as you were saying in a previous episode, it's not out of animosity or conflict or hatred. It's just a recognition that they're just not good for each other given their goals in life or their vibe or something, but they still love each other and they're still lovely people. And that kind of termination can be very meaningful for me personally, and hopefully for the clients. Anyway, going on. I apologize for throat burping if anyone heard that. I'm always drinking liquid while I'm podcasting, which isn't great for the possibility of throat burps, apparently for me. When you drink soda, especially like right from a can or a bottle where there's a lot of carbonation, do you burp essentially after every gulp?
No.
I do.
Wow.
I don't know what's wrong with me.
No, you got talents.
I feel like if I'm drinking highly carbonated something, I even if I try to manage, I don't try to swallow all the fizz. I don't know how you do that exactly, but and pretty much I think after every time I take a drink, I have to there's a little bit of like it doesn't happen involuntarily, you know what I mean? Now I'm drinking right now non-carbonated
We
stuff.
should go get something.
Oh God. Podcasting, the misophonia people, and just really everybody out there. Often I will edit out any sort of throat burps that I have. Yeah. But in that instance, I don't think it's possible because I was in the middle of a sentence anyway. Going on, my therapist sent me a beautiful email where she expressed grief at the ending of our relationship, and I expressed the same and thanked her for all that she has done for me. Since then, however, I am really struggling to know how to process the sense of loss. I think because so much of our relationship was based around reparenting, this is maybe what it feels like to lose a parent. Oh.
Sure.
However, vocabulary about love and loss in this context feels somehow inappropriate because of the boundaries of the therapeutic relationship. Thoughts on that, Bob?
Why? Well, why is that? Like, what's inappropriate about having a relationship that's sort of got parental, aspect to it? That just sounds like normal to me. So I'm all for you hanging in with it, having a goodbye. Like I don't see where a boundary actually has to be a obstacle.
Yeah. There's nothing inappropriate, as you say, in the least, as we've been talking about, right? Going on. There are virtually millions of books and songs about the loss of romantic love and friendship, but nothing seems to exist to express the ending of a therapeutic relationship and the profound impact they have on the lives of our clients.
Oh.
I would love to hear yours and Bob's thoughts on this.
Oh, you should write that. You could write that song.
It's funny. So I'm not sure if I haven't written a song about this. I've written, I tend to write songs about, I'm not a great lyricist. I will tend to like my own lyrics, but I would never hold them up as like Bob Dylan-esque poetry of any sort. But I tend to like it, and I tend to write things that are quite meaningful to me. And I've written a lot of songs in my years, so there's a possibility. In fact, I know I've written one song, not necessarily to clients, but maybe even to the listeners. I wrote it during the pandemic, and I do plan on recording it, but the lyrics are something like, you want to be loved enough to just sleep, something like that. I can't remember how it goes, and I am curious what people would think of that song. But yeah, I could think about this the next time lyrics come up for me. But my songs tend to be fairly emo, so it's not going to be like an uplifting or obvious sort of song. I tend to write songs that are more on the Depeche Mode side of things. All right, let's take a break, and we get back. Let's enjoy the silence and answer more emails. What do you say?
And some gas.
All right, next email, patron Jen from New Jersey. She says, hi, Kirk, Bob, Rebecca, and Umberto. I have a lot of trouble holding on to my own opinions and thoughts about things.
Yeah.
Why do you say it that way, Bob?
Me too sometimes.
Yeah, that's what I thought it meant.
Yeah.
I filed this email under butler syndrome.
Yeah, right.
If someone else becomes angry or upset with me and expresses a strong opinion, even if my head knows I'm allowed to disagree, it jumpstarts this whole obsessive process in my brain that can go on for months. You're nodding your head. So
I'm familiar with this.
What is it? What does that feel like?
It's awful. First off, it feels real. And lots of times I don't have awareness that, this is a distortion. This is a version of butler syndrome, grabbing me. I think, I'm an asshole.
And you're also possibly distorting the other person's mind?
The one I'm thinking about right now was not a distortion. They said what they said. But yes, the answer is yes, I'm apt to do that too.
Meaning a massive amplification of the intensity of their displeasure of you?
Correct. Yeah, nicely put.
Going on. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, and I do think I have a solid sense of identity. But I would say I have more of an anxious or preoccupied attachment, and that may be more related to what's going on here. Specifically, it feels related to my experiences as a child with my father. When he would drink, something inside of me knew I was more responsible than him at those times. So I took the keys and threw away the beer and told him to stop drinking. That led to him blaming me for ruining his good time. I just remember feeling devastated as a child and second-guessing my own opinion about what was true. This is how I feel now whenever someone gets angry with me. End of email. Bob, what do you think?
Yeah, it looks like you really get its origins for you, and that's good. So I think what you want, though, is how do I hang on to myself when that thing happens and I go a little kerflooey? Do you think that's what they want?
Yeah.
Well, that seems reasonable.
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer. Go to therapy?
Yeah. This is a classic, well-documented, well-talked about role of a child of an alcoholic. There have been a lot of accounts and ink about exactly what you were talking about, a very well understood, well talked about role and complex of an adult child of alcoholic. You might want to look into that whole literature, which I find isn't talked about the way that it used to be, but that doesn't mean it still doesn't get talked about. But it's the adult child of alcoholic, and it has an abbreviation, ACOA. If you just Google that and maybe get books on that, there's whole chapters on exactly what you're talking about. What I'll say is that it's a lot easier said than done to recover from this. I've worked with clients specifically on this, but there's a lot of roads to this syndrome, alcoholism and your experience being one of them, but another is parents who are abusive in other ways or mistreating in other ways or neglectful in other ways. And yeah, what it does is it both increases the panic when other people are seen as out of control in some way because of your early childhood. Your life literally depended, and the lives of others in your family literally depended on you being hypervigilant about what was going on outside of you and managing that, and therefore not having time to spend time on yourself. Children will often even experience times when they are playing by themselves and focusing on their own needs, which kids should be doing 99% of the time. And then something bad happens and they realize, oh, I let my guard down. I was not hypervigilant. I need to remember to never focus on myself. So there's that. And there's also this utter terror when people are angry or out of control or creating chaos. And it creates this total irrational sense of danger when other people are even just mildly upset. And it's so hard to break that, even with 100% awareness of this syndrome. The individual will still be, you, Bob, for example, are 100 billion% aware of your butler syndrome, and yet you engage in it every day, I'm guessing.
You hate me, don't you? I'm not making light of what the person wrote in. Yes, I'm aware of this. I have a very hard time with it. It's better than it was 5 years ago. Are we still recording?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So it's better than it was 5 years ago. And, I chip away at it, and I think you should chip away at it. And the good thing is you're writing in, which means that you have an awareness that you're getting caught up in it and that this thing is hornswoggling you and taking you for a ride. I think my experience as a young person was my parents never apologized for their behavior, like any of it, right? And were pretty scary. So, and my parents are not bad people. When I think about them these days, I think they both had tragic early lives and, like anybody, did the best they could.
But your dad was terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
And your mom was a different kind of terrifying. Like,
yeah,
quietly terrifying.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And my mom was Teflon to accountability. So it's always somebody else's fault. So,
well, Teflon is one way. Another way is like a massively defended attacker when she was even mildly accused of something. Not even accused, but like when the implication was that she might have made a mistake even, she came out with all guns a-blazing.
Yeah, she did. Yeah, right. So a pretty developed sense of it's somebody else's fault. So,
and your role was to manage Dad's mood.
Yeah, and survive her. And there were many times where, she would go on the attack with me or my sibs or him.
Were you supposed to manage her mood too?
I think I was really good at thinking she was right. So when she came after me for something that I did that's supposedly a bad thing, I was good at feeling ashamed of myself. Good at it. I was adept at feeling ashamed of myself and believing what she told me. So as an adult now, I mean, I am vulnerable to those kinds of distortions. I'm thinking about a time, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years ago, where a friend of mine was upset with me. Two aspects of that. One, they were upset with me about something I did, and I felt just horrible, like I should just end my life because I had been such a bad friend or whatever. And that lasted probably an afternoon, and still somewhat compelling. And then the same friend said something really mean to me. We were actually in a conflict. We met with the idea that we were going to resolve the conflict, and like 3/4 of the way through the evening, he said something, he took a shot at me. He said something really aggressive to me. And I remember feeling stunned and ashamed and putting up with it and sort of ignoring its impact on me and then letting it go. And was surprised about 2 months later when another mutual friend of ours had mentioned to me that my friend was aware that he took a cheap shot at me. I was surprised that he knew it. And I guess I know it, but I don't think I knew it then. And I'm not sure it took me a while for it to dawn on me that that's some bullshit right there. Like there's no place for it. I feel bad enough about myself that, it doesn't take much for that to come up. And there's a general assumption that if somebody's upset with me, I must have done something bad or wrong, which is a problem.
Yeah.
It's particularly a problem in work because that's a distortion and it'll interfere with, optimal, I don't know, good therapy. It will. So, but in my personal life, it's definitely a problem. And I noticed that in my marriage these days, I'm finding my voice more and I'm calling foul on stuff that I ought to call foul on, like, hey, dude, you're not allowed to say that. Or that's against the rules, And it doesn't require my partner's agreement for me to recognize that's some bullshit,
Yeah.
And she can call bullshit on me, and she's right. I've misbehaved in many ways. So it's not like it's a one-way street where, I'm infallible. I'm definitely fallible. But recognizing her fallibility and not getting too wrapped up in, oh, what does this say about me? Or did I do a bad thing? Or how is this my fault? Is really useful. And I remember, when you and me, let's see, something happened early on, and I was saying something about...
You and me?
Not between us. It was about my relationship with Colleen, but right around the time we got started, the first few months. And I told you a story about some conflict that we were in, and I was taking responsibility for it. And you were like, Bob, sometimes people are jerks, right? Like you were just kind of calling out, like, dude, this isn't your table. And in retrospect, looking back on it, it wasn't. It wasn't. And Colleen and I have talked about it many times over the years, and there's a lot of recognition of, that distortion coming up and getting in the way. And
how did you process what I said? It sounds like a memorable moment to you.
Yeah, we were standing in my kitchen in my condo in Greenwood.
Huh.
Or we were on the phone, and I was in my kitchen.
And how did it land with you? Was it off-putting?
Well, at the time I was taking all that Gottman training, and Gottman is always about 2 to tango. And so I'm like racking my brain trying to figure out, how is this my fault? Because it must be my fault because it always takes 2 to tango, right? And you're saying, no, dude, sometimes it just takes 1.
Yeah.
And I remember just feeling confused by that.
Confused.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which would make sense, if you have poor boundaries, if you have a poor sense of self, or one that's topsy-turvy. By the way,
the best you could hope for, it would be
confusion. Yeah. That's actually good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's heading in the direction.
Yeah.
It's a question mark instead of a certainty that wasn't true.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the person that wrote in, I think they said early on in the email that it doesn't happen all the time. It just happens some of the time, which means that, a lot of the time they're not subject to this kind of thing. And
right. They have a sense of self.
Yeah.
It just has to do with, I think what they're saying is when their attachment insecurity is triggered.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I took too.
Yeah.
So that's good. It's not all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I don't have anything to add to that other than I've fucking hate your parents.
Oh,
If they would have just dialed it back, just half, like things would be so much better for you. You would still suffer in the same ways that everyone else does, but you wouldn't have all this additional internal butler denial of you and just how much work that you've had to do to get halfway down the road. And I'm just really angry at your parents.
When they were young, like my parents met when they were in their early 20s and they got married. I think he was 23 and she was 22 when they got married. And her mom had just passed away, a stroke or whatever, and died pretty young, 53, I think. They went, I'm from Philadelphia, so they took a day trip up to New York City. And my dad likes architecture, so they're walking around and looking at all the buildings or whatever, and he sees this Episcopal church. Did I tell you this story? And he wants to go in and look around, like a cathedral. Like, who wouldn't want to do that, right? They go in, they look around, he's 23 or 22 years old or whatever, and they're looking around and they're just seeing stuff. And he comes out, and a bird just coincidentally shits on his shoulder when it's New York City, right? There's pigeons everywhere, right? And he thinks it's God telling him he went into the wrong church, and you're a bad person.
Because he's Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah, my folks are Catholic. That's the kind of culture. Like the person who wrote in about the cult, right? Like I was just thinking about my folks in their early days and how they were subject to and dependent on this message from people that I got to say, I don't respect. Like the priests that they describe and the priests that I have met, I don't respect them. I don't think that they have any business telling anybody else how to live, particularly because they live such isolated existences. They're just very prescribed, and so they don't have access to a lot of the experience that anybody would need to if they were actually going to be a good resource for advice, right? This is like, these people should never talk about sex. They have no fucking idea, probably, what they're talking about, so they should never. But I remember my mom telling me, after she had me, she goes to the priest and she's like, I don't want any more kids. I'm 3rd out of 4. And the priest says, well, it's your wifely duty to have sex with your husband, and contraception's a sin, right? So what'd she do? She did probably the first independent thing she's ever done. And she said, basically, fuck you, and went on the pill. And then they decided they wanted to have my brother. He's the only planned one. And then after that, she had another form of birth control and they didn't have any more kids. So, but he was like, oh, Betsy, Jesus, you're going to go to hell, And, the one good thing about him is he was a pain in the ass, but he could be dragged along, at least in some ways. And he came around on that one. And, I don't know, maybe sex is a powerful motivator. So,
well, silver lining, you were born.
Yeah. Yeah.
If your parents had their way, maybe they would have been on the pill during your sexy times. Yeah. Your sexy origins.
Yeah. Interestingly, I'm the only spring baby. My sibs, October, November, and December.
But all of us, that's funny. I never thought about thinking about that. I mean, I must have thought about it at some point. All of us are born around my birthday in December. It's all in the fall and winter, and from September. So literally September, November, December, January. So so the sexy times would be in like January through. So it'd be winter, right? Winter sex times. Yeah. But you're saying all your siblings were what sex times?
October, November, December.
So your siblings are winter sex times, but you're the only.
Yeah, I'm a spring.
You're the only summer sex times.
Yeah. So August 11 is their anniversary. My birthday's May 16. So guess I know where I came from.
Yeah. All right, let's take a break. One last quick email.
Right on.
The last email in the doc.
Oh my God, we got them all.
We did.
Woof.
Just like Pokemon. All right, real quick. Patron Elizabeth from Louisiana. She says, I'm currently pursuing my master's in marriage and family therapy, and I just started seeing clients at my internship last week. I want to work mostly with couples, and after seeing my first few, I realize it can be much more difficult than working with individual patients. But with that being said, I am personally finding it much more rewarding as well. Just chiming in here. Yeah, I'm on the record as saying that couple therapy is by far the most countertransferentially provoking, by far, going on. In my session with my last couple, I ended up recommending that they both start their own personal therapy and work on getting themselves in a better place as individuals before they are able to come back together as a couple and fight for their marriage. Their wife, in particular, had battled postpartum depression and stated that she didn't know if she wanted to stay in her marriage because she didn't even know who she was as a person after having her children. I'm going to read it. The wife in particular had battled postpartum depression and stated she didn't know if she wanted to stay in her marriage because she didn't even know who she was. Okay, so I don't know if that is related to the depression or just independent of that. This was mostly what prompted me to recommend individual therapy. But as I thought back on my sessions with other couples, I realized they all had individual issues and could probably benefit from their own therapy before they engaged in therapy as a couple. So my question is, how do you gauge when a couple is ready for therapy? Bob, what do you think?
I gauge it when they show up at my office and say they want to have couple therapy.
Yeah. Where's the line between the individual, because everyone has individual issues. And of course, if they're in therapy for couple therapy, then, well, let me just cut to the chase and say that. So there's different ways of thinking about this. There's the way I think about it, and I think the way you think about it too, Bob, and the way the other people think about it. Another way of thinking about it is there's a right way and a wrong way. But or I guess every couple therapist needs to know how they think about it and disclose accordingly to the clients. So there's an old school, and I would say a non-marriage and family therapy way of thinking about it, which is that you cannot work on the couple until the individual issues have been ironed out, which on its face is a little ridiculous because individual issues are never ironed out. And we are not isolated individuals. We exist within relationships, and ironing out individuals are the same as ironing out couples is the same as ironing out individuals. Anyway, so I have never thought to myself, I'm trying to think and I've worked with some couples with some major fucking individual issues, like full-blown personality disorders, trauma histories, dissociation, PTSD, complex trauma, of course, attachment disruptions, and disorganized attachment styles, all across the board. And at no point do I ever think that couple therapy is counterindicated. Now, if you're the sort of therapist, marriage therapist, couple therapist that works on very surface level stuff, that can be very effective, skills-based work, sort of self-actualization or very discrete communication exercises, then okay, then you would be the sort of therapist perhaps that would say they need to go to individual therapy before they come to you if they have any kind of issues. Most of the people coming to you would be referred out, by the way. Or you might want to think about advertising yourself as such, maybe even saying that you teach a class on communication rather than providing therapy, because if you run into individual issues, it was framed as not like deep therapy of any sort. So there's that. The other thing that can be done, of course, is you can do both. You can do individual and couple, which I do very frequently. Also, I will do a hybrid of individual and couple therapy with the couple. I mean, I consider it just relational conjoint therapy that I occasionally talk individually with the clients. But when I'm talking individually with the individuals in the couple, I'll have a whole hour with just the wife, for example, or just the husband, or just the one member of the relationship, and we might only talk about their personal issues. Now, if I have thought this is something that needs to be addressed in much more concentrated form, I don't have that set up, and it's maybe not the sort of work that would dovetail very neatly with the couple therapy, then, like I had a couple client a few years ago who one of the members was suffering from a mild to moderate eating disorder that was pretty discrete. And I definitely referred out, and we talked about it, but I didn't end couple therapy. So, and I incorporated what they were doing in their individual work into the couple therapy. It just works together. So when you ask Patron Elizabeth, you're saying that, let's see, the wife was battling postpartum depression and stated that she didn't know if she wanted to stay in her marriage because she didn't even know who she was as a person after having her children. So that presentation to me doesn't indicate to me, given my style, that I would be concerned. I might say, would you also like to do individual therapy to get more into the weeds on that with someone? But Patron Elizabeth from Louisiana, you're pursuing your marriage and family therapy, and you just started your internship. So I would really explore for yourself and with your supervisor and your colleagues at the university what you're going to have as an approach to this, because this notion of having this clean couple therapy venue where you're not getting into that crazy business of having to talk about depression and whether or not someone wants to stay in a marriage is, well, I'm framing it as a ridiculous notion. So take it or leave it. But other people will say that in a totally different way. But to me, everyone comes to the table with messiness, and to want your clients all to be clean and washed before they come into the session, all baptized, if you will, divorced of their sins, is to be very frustrated as a therapist, and 99% of the time referring your couples out. So I don't know if Patron Elizabeth, you are parroting what you're being told, or you're assuming, or this is your point of view, which you're entitled to. Like I said, if you're this sort of couple therapist that wants to have those baptized clients before they come in clean of their sins, then okay, but you're going to have to screen and advertise yourself as such. You're going to have it in your disclosure. And when people contact you as couples, you're going to have to say, and by the way, I don't know how you would word it because I don't do this sort of work, but you at the very least would inform them, I'm the sort of therapist that in the initial phase, I assess for individual issues that would indicate that they're not a good fit for me as a couple therapist. You might be a good fit for a different couple therapist that is okay with integrating all of that individual issue into the couple therapy, but I am not. So know that up front, and we might in the first session determine, or maybe even after the fifth session, figure out that you would be better served by going to individual therapy and then coming back to me. The other thing is the way you're framing it is that you're saying, I realized that they all had individual issues that could probably benefit from their own therapy before they engaged in therapy as a couple. So I'm assuming you're saying engaging in therapy as a couple with you. If you have this approach, the kinds of issues, even the ones that you mentioned in the example, that could be 15 years of therapy. So unless you want to be twiddling your thumbs for the next 15 years as you wait for all these people to come back to you, then I would recommend adopting the Kirk Bob / right way of thinking. Bob, what do you think about everything I just said?
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking, well, what are the reasons I would not offer couple therapy? And the only one that comes to mind is if one of them is being abusive to the other and they can't talk with each other, and the one that's being abused can't feel safe, then there's no way that couple therapy, at least as I understand it, is going to do them any good. And
even I have a caveat for that, which I won't go into for the sake of time, but I completely agree with the broad strokes of that completely, yeah. Meaning that safety and a safe place for the abused individual can be facilitated by an effective couple therapist that understands also how to treat intimate partner violence, as I do. I specialize in that work, and know how to assess and make sure that we move down the road. Because if I have a hard line around that for some couples, they won't do any work.
Right.
they won't go to a domestic violence specialist. They won't go to another therapist.
Yeah, I understand.
The abuser won't seek out individual therapy. So I will sometimes assess, well, this isn't ideal, obviously, but if I refer out, this will be the end of the line potentially. So I'm going to hold on to them in this scenario and start, I'll meet individually with the victim, talk with them about their rights and about, depending on what's happening, recommending shelters or advocacy or when to call the cops and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And it's stressful, but I also know how to talk with intimate partner violence perpetrators in a way that helps them move down the road. I've seen, I was a part of the mandated, I just throat burped again, by the way. The people would be convicted of domestic violence, of assault 4 or 3, and they would be forced to go to therapy with me and the DV group with a bunch of other perpetrators. And me and the DV team were in charge of reforming these individuals and breaking them of their bullshit and helping them to see the light. And we had the authority to keep them in the group until they saw the light. And it was grueling work. It was really great, though, because we would have members that were about to graduate that would just fucking call out the shit of the new members.
They could get away with it.
They very much could, yeah.
Yeah. That's cool.
And, some of them were really nice and compassionate about it, but they, these kind of guys, they were all men, are not the sort of guys to keep quiet about shit. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, so you were saying, sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's fine. Other than that, it's all relevant. But I'm thinking about what's happening. What are these people doing in their relationship? Not really thinking about does somebody have like a postpartum depression? I'm just really looking at what's the interaction that's right before my eyes and work with that, and learn about schemas or whatever it is people carry around or their attachment insecurity and so forth, which pretty much is everybody. So. If you're waiting for secure attachment before you see a couple, then waiting a while.
And not everyone does this kind of work, but to be specific with your example, so if I don't know this scenario, but there's a heterosexual marriage and the wife has depression and says that she doesn't know if she wants to stay in her marriage, and she doesn't know who she is as a person after having her kids, maybe because of a lifetime of being denied the opportunity to reflect on herself and receive attunement and space to explore who she is and reflection of her experience. And of course, individual therapy can be a good venue for that. But to me, couple therapy is much quicker to get to that because we can, in the session, for example, I could attune to the wife and then call on the husband to attune or model how to attune. So the husband goes home and attunes. Everything can be translated into the real world much faster, and it can be much more intense to be attuned by one's husband as opposed to one's therapist. So these ideas of, well, we want to be clean and relegate it to individual therapy, I find to be a very, I hate to say this, but it's a fairly old white man way of thinking about things. I hate having that kind of phrase, but it has this, at the very least, it has a very sort of medicalized sense of things and a non-systemic, non-relational way of thinking. We tend to think, oh, well, you have this issue, it's in you as an individual, so we need to fix you before you can engage. A totally valid other way of thinking about it is the depression and her wonders about being in the marriage and not knowing who she is not an individual issue. It's a relational systemic issue, and therefore you have to treat the system and the relationship.
Like what opportunity would there be? I don't know who I am, and my partner is making room for me to explore whatever that it is and is interested and curious about, what comes about. That's fucking gold.
Mm-hmm. And when she describes her experience and her struggles, and he's like, oh, so that's why you were so distant last week. I had no idea. I have so much, at the very least, less taking it personally, and I have so much more compassion. That is completely missed as an opportunity when you do individual therapy. How many clients are able to translate the magic that happens in individual therapy? They go home and they say, we made all these discoveries about who I am, and let me tell you about my vulnerability. Like, most clients don't do that kind of work, but for a spouse to witness it is so powerful and can really move people down the road so much faster. Instead of me trying to coach an individual client on what to do when they get home to translate what they're doing here, they can just see it with their own two eyes. Anyway.
That's why I switched from primarily being individual therapist to seeing couples.
Be one of us, Bob.
Yeah. You
marriage and family therapists.
You drag me into the damn cult.
And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.